Without further ado, here is my presentation on a history of horse thieves and anti-horse theft associations in Washington County. So first, I always like to share the resources that I use when I put together a presentation, and a lot of them come from our Kinship Family Heritage Research Center and our library and archives. But I also use historical newspapers, which are available on different databases online as well. I do have an abiding love affair with historical newspapers, especially related to Washington County. Hagerstown was publishing a lot of newspapers. We have great indexes of those from about 1790 to 1865. So first, I'd like to give you an overview of Washington County just to set the context. In the 18th and 19th century, Washington County was formed in 1776. Hagerstown was originally called Elizabethtown, if you didn't know that. Elizabethtown was laid out by Jonathan Hager in the 1760s, and it became Hagerstown, incorporated as Hagerstown around 1813. All right. So, in general, Western Maryland through the 19th century saw a lot of great development. And it is essentially Western Maryland is the background for our horse thieves talk today. Western Maryland was a transportation hub even in the 19th century. It made it a perfect place to steal and transport horses through Washington County and Western Maryland. You had the National Turnpike, which ran east to west, which is Route 40 today. You had the Great Wagon Road running north to south from Pennsylvania to the Shenandoah Valley. Of course, you had many new turnpikes as you get into the 19th century branching out and through Western Maryland. You have the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal beginning in 1828, active until 1924. And by the 19th century, you have four railroads coming to Washington County, including the Franklin Railroad by 1841, the Cumberland Valley Railroad in 1865, and then later the Western Maryland Railroad and the Washington County Railroad line of the B&O. So, what were some 18th and 19th century crimes in Washington County? What were people doing? We have so many here listed that we find in the newspapers. And if you use those newspaper indexes that I showed you earlier, you will see a full list of these. But assault, breaking and entering, cruelty to animals, fraud, homicide, attempted homicide, horse theft, which was the grand theft auto of the day, kidnapping, libel and slander, rape, sexual assault, robbery, larceny, burglary, theft, trespassing, stolen property, vandalism. You're seeing all of these crimes being reported. But if you look at the indexed newspaper accounts that we have, one of the most popular crimes to commit was horse theft. Horses were very valuable personal property. They were your transportation, your workforce. They were all of those things to people. So they were very valuable, and often they were a very popular source of crime. So, how were people preventing crime in the 18th and 19th century? In colonial America, before police departments, a county's sheriff was the most important law enforcement official. They were ensuring customs and laws were followed, and they were holding sheriff sales, collecting taxes, making sure you were following the legal norms of the day. Constables had similar duties, but they handled court orders. There was a state-controlled militia, and also local residents took care of problems and supported each other in different social ways. The Washington County Sheriff Department began in 1777 with the election of Washington County's first sheriff, George Hershey. We've had about 80 sheriffs since then, including the infamous George Swearingen. And sheriffs oversaw enforcing local ordinances and customs and collected taxes until 1838. Police departments began organizing in the U.S. after 1800, with one of the earliest in Boston in 1838. And the Hagerstown Police Department's origins are a little unclear as of yet that I've been able to find, but they began forming between 1863 and 1883. If you know more about this history, please contact the Historical Society at 301-797-8782, because I'd love to talk to you. But in the American South, you also had county and state forces that were looking for enslaved persons who had escaped. And then in the West, you had U.S. Marshals since about 1789. How are local crimes dealt with and where specifically? So, in Washington County, the local judicial system handled local crimes. An act passed by the General Assembly in 1785 granted the justices of Washington County to tax citizens to build a courthouse and a jail. So, we get the original courthouse here on the left. It stood in Public Square. It had a market house on the bottom, and the courthouse was on the top. And you can see it there with the, this is an 1830s depiction of it. This second courthouse for Hagerstown is located here on the right in a picture of it, and it was constructed from 1818 until 1822, and it was designed by Benjamin Latrobe. This is the location of the present-day courthouse, if you're familiar with Hagerstown. This particular second courthouse here on the right burnt in 1871, and the current courthouse was then built. And where were criminals kept at this time? So for smaller offenses, the Washington County Jail or the poorhouse would suffice. The Washington County Jail was originally a log cabin located at 26 to 28 East Franklin Street. And after 1818, a new jail was built on the corner of Jonathan and Church Streets, accepting prisoners beginning in 1826. So that's at the corner here. You can see I have a depiction down there on the right, just a Google Street screenshot of where that initial jail was built. And the original jail entrance was through a house facing on Jonathan Street. So you can see the house in this image here with the people going up to the front door there. And that is also where the sheriff lived. And then you would access the interior of the jail by going through there. And the original jail was destroyed by a fire in 1857 and was rebuilt in 1858 and is, of course, now Crash Champion's Collision Repair. So there you go. But for larger offenses, people would be sent to the Maryland Penitentiary in Baltimore, which opened in 1811. So sentencing horse thieves. If you were a horse thief and you were arrested, it was a crime punishable by state laws with various things. So you might have to face pillory time, public lashing, branding the forehead or body with the letters HT, or various sentences of jail time in your county or state. So for example, in the 18th century, a 1780 Pennsylvania law passed an act to increase the punishments of horse stealing. And this included the first offense, the convicted, shall stand in the pillory for 1 hour and shall be publicly whipped on his, her, or their bare backs with 39 lashes, well laid on, and at the same time shall have his, her, or their ears cut off and nailed to the pillory. And for the second offense shall be whipped and pilloried in like manner and be branded on the forehead in a plain and visible manner with the letters HT for horse thief. So this was repealed in 1860. So just a pre-Civil War, they were like, maybe that's a little bit too much physical pain we're inflicting. But of course, there were still jail sentences. And legal executions, such as hanging for horse thieves, were very rare in the East. But they are a popular myth in the Wild West, I would say. We always have people, stories of people taking people out and hanging them for being a horse thief. Not that that didn't happen, but we don't find as many actual documented cases. So what about horses? Why were they so popular to steal? I touched on this a little bit earlier, but with such punishments as risks, why was this the case? Horses were just so valuable, and thieves could make money off of them. To quote King Richard from Shakespeare's Richard III, a horse, my kingdom for a horse, right? Horses were worth kingdoms, one might say. They were common means of transportation. If you didn't have a horse, you might be walking on foot, but if you weren't on foot, you had a horse or horse-drawn transport in some form. So a horse was, as I shared earlier, your car. It was your income because horses hauled your resources you might be selling. Horses were transportation for barges, fire engines, mail coaches, farm equipment, etc. Later on, hearses as well. And horses also powered wars. They were extremely important. You can see a horse here. This is an early 19th century image of a family in Washington County, and he is taking care of he might be a farrier, I believe, taking care of the horseshoes on the horse. Here's a nice picture from 1886. So even working up towards the late 19th century of Wareham's City Bakery in Hagerstown. And the bakery truck is being drawn by a horse. So you want your baked goods, you need to get a horse. Then we have E.E. Wyant's Clock Repair Shop in Keedysville. This is a man. It's his personal form of transportation is his horse. I believe this photo is about from the 1880s or 1890s even. And then we have Mr. and Mrs. George Pound from Cavetown. They are getting around in their horse-drawn wagon. So even up until the early 20th century, people are relying on horses for transportation in Washington County. We even have some very fun photographs showing Hagerstown in the 1910s and early 1920s, and you'll have automobiles parked next to horse-drawn carriages still as late as 1920. So that's an interesting take. So let's get into some actual horse theft discussion and cases in Washington County. So between 1790 and 1797, the Washington Spy newspaper, published in Elizabethtown, now Hagerstown, reported 54 notices of horse theft. And this was 54 notices of horse theft. This is compared to only 9 notices for homicide or attempted homicide, and only 6 notices for libel and slander. So these notices came from Washington County residents, of course, with enough resources to post about a horse theft in the paper, that their horse had been stolen. They were looking for information on it, looking for the horse. But these are also only notices that we know about, because these are the newspapers that have survived. So keep that in mind. But in general, the most popular crime published was horse theft. All right, sorry about that there. I'm just going to take a quick drink of water. I love this 1852 painting that's depicting horse thieves. All right. So we have a variety of horse thieves. Let's talk a little bit about them. So you had perhaps the lone horse thief who was taking horses out of the county or state. As soon as you removed a horse from the county or the state, you made it much harder to track across county and state lines. It was harder to communicate between different towns, much more so than it is now with our databases of crimes that you can just pull from different locations. Back then, it was writing a letter or actually going to that county, going to that state, investigating all of those things. But also, a gang of horse thieves was a very popular method of horse theft, and they operated in much the same way. So gangs would steal horses and they would move them to secure hidden locations in Washington County before then taking them out of the county. Gangs were known to have sworn oaths to each other, and they also often had a network of partners helping them. So someone who's hiding horses in their barn, hiding them in a secluded location, those types of things. And you also had, of course, people who were doing the stealing, transporting, and selling of these horses. So a lot of different facets of that. And then finally, a very interesting method of horse theft is if you often see like ads in the newspapers at the time, 18th century, 19th century ads saying, I found a horse, please pay it to me, or please pay me to return it to you. So someone might publish in the paper, oh, I found one chestnut horse. It wandered onto my property. Please give me this fee for having found it, and I'll return it to you. That might actually be someone who didn't just find the horse. They might have actually stolen it themselves. A bold move. So let's look at some horse theft notices from 1790 to 1797 here. So horses were stolen from across Washington County. No inn, tavern, public square, or place of business or private residence was safe, it seems. So from 1790 to 1797, you have horses being stolen from Hagerstown's public square, from Fort Frederick Furnace, from inns, taverns, private dwellings, ironworks, all of those places. And you will see in the newspapers various rewards were posted, often from $2 to $200, as well as some rewards in pounds and shillings by this point. Some people were still operating using pounds and shillings. And so, just some examples of these for some local flavor. So between these years, you had John Reagan. He was offering a $2 reward, which is worth about $68 today. I have that noted on the screen there. Nicholas Stuff, he offered a £5 reward. Matthew Calhoun, 10 shillings reward. George Clark offered $100, which is the equivalent today of about $3,500. So he really wanted his horse. This might have been a horse that was one of his top horses for breeding, perhaps. So maybe a thoroughbred horse, that type of thing. Or maybe it was just his favorite. It was his favorite horse. And he was sad to have seen it be stolen. If someone stole my cat out of my home, I would offer a large reward to have my cat returned to me. So I understand. And then also Daniel Morgan, $200, which is the equivalent to almost $7,000 today. So he really wanted his horse back. So how much would you have offered as a reward if you're a horse owner and your favorite horse was stolen? And perhaps it left you walking from Williamsport to Hagerstown on foot, waiting for the passing stagecoach to take instead. How much would you offer to have your horse back? It would depend on a lot of things, right? How much money you had, how much money you were making, all of those things. All right. So let's look at some horse theft notices from 1797 to 1804. Wealthy residents during this period, they were also having their horses stolen as well. It affected people of all classes. Samuel Ringgold, you might know Samuel Ringgold, who was a general in the American Revolution and I believe the War of 1812 from the Ringgold St. James area. He offered a $40 reward in 1797 for his horse. And then you might have heard of the man Nathaniel Rochester in Washington County. Of course, he was the first president of the Hagerstown Bank. He offered a $5 reward in 1800 for his horse. So a lot of these places that we might recognize today in Hagerstown, horses were being stolen from. But what were residents to do? How are Washington County residents to handle this? So the local sheriff, deputy sheriffs, they didn't seem to be making any headway in preventing this. Of course, they have a lot of other things they're doing on the daily. But in 1803, two Washington County residents who have been victims of horse theft took matters into their own hands. So introducing Daniel Gare and John Reagan. They posted in 1803 the following announcement in the local newspaper. Notice is hereby given to the citizens of Washington County that a subscription paper is now in the hands of Daniel Gare and John Reagan for the purpose of obtaining subscribers to establish a fund to enable them to pursue horse thieves and recover horses, which may be stolen from the subscribers. Those persons who have a desire to enter into such an association will call upon Gare and Reagan and subscribe their names, as it is the wish of those who have already subscribed to put the business into operation as soon as possible. What is this business? Well, the article describes it as detecting all horse thieves and driving all such as are now skulking in our neighborhood to some other part of the world. So essentially, Gare and Reagan, they're proposing a subscription paper, they would have called it, which meant individuals who signed up, subscribed, put money towards forming this group that would actively support them, and they would actively support others who were victims of horse thieves. So they were essentially creating a mutual support group and a network of Washington County residents who would pursue horse thieves and recover stolen horses. So if you financially supported the group, you'd be a part of it. Daniel Gare was a local man known to be involved in horse racing, so it was very important to him to not have his horses stolen. And John Reagan was an owner of the Indian King Tavern, a horse breeder, a horse racer, and also, as we heard earlier, a victim of horse theft. So the association, the Washington County Association for the Detection of Horse Thieves, was officially formed in 1803 on October 12th. This group was formed in Hagerstown's or Elizabethtown's public square. They went to the Washington County Courthouse and Washington County government, and they had it officially formalized. And this is the great American tradition of forming association societies and clubs as well. So we see this early trend here. I'm going to take a quick drink of water. So let's put the Washington County Association for the Detection of Horse Thieves in context. So they formed in 1803. But let's look at when other anti-horse theft associations were being formed. So in 1810, you had the society in, I am not from Massachusetts. Is it Dedham? Dedham? The Society in Dedham, Massachusetts for apprehending horse thieves. In 1815, you have the Mutual Association for the Suppression of Horse Stealing of Westchester County, New York. That's 1815. The most notable member of this group was Washington Irving, author of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, featuring horses. Gunpowder, if you do remember that. I believe that's Ichabod Crane's horse's name. And then 1853, you have the Anti-Horse Theft Association of Clark County, Missouri. This group in the West had 40,000 members by 1910, and they were a large group across several territories and states at that point. You have a great little depiction down here. Stop thief, the man making way. So that kind of shares that despite some of these really early horse thief detection organizations forming, the 1810 Massachusetts one claims to be the oldest. JFK and JFK Jr. were both members. These societies lasted into the 20th century, more as social clubs by that point. Washington County's was 1803, so they were quite early themselves. They were really having a problem with this early on. So let's talk about some specific examples of horse theft in Washington County. So this was a horse theft from Jacob Fouts in 1805. So despite the association having formed in 1803, horse theft continued, and it would continue to continue. It's difficult to gauge the effects of the association and what they were actually accomplishing. But Jacob Fouts, in January of 1805, he secured his horse. He rode up to the front of Middlecoff's Tavern in Hagerstown, Elizabethtown at the time. He secured his sorrel horse, is what he says. But upon leaving the tavern, he found that his horse, saddle, stirrups, and bridle had all been stolen. He offered a $20 reward for apprehending the thief and a $5 reward for returning the horse. $10 if found outside the county. So a lot is involved there. Of course, they really want to get those thieves who are working locally, so they're offering more for those. Jacob Baker, a horse thief or not? Let's look at this case from 1808. We have an interesting story of two Cavetown men, Henry Strauss and John Hettinger, who apprehended a suspected horse thief named Jacob Baker. So Jacob Baker was described as 47 years old. He spoke English and German tolerably well, and he claimed he was a blacksmith from Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, just a local blacksmith passing through. But Strauss and Hettinger from Cavetown, they found Joseph Baker had a horse with him, a black gelding, or a castrated male horse, supposed to be stolen, 4 years old, 15 hands and a half high, etc., etc. And Strauss and Hettinger actually took this horse from Joseph Baker, and they offered to return it to the owner if the owner could come, prove their property that the horse was theirs, pay the charges, and take him away. So who do you trust in this scenario? These two men from Cavetown, they had reason to believe that this man passing through had a stolen horse with him. Doesn't necessarily explain why they believed that. Or did they take the horse from Joseph Baker? We don't really know. I didn't find any answers to those questions in the newspapers, but you can see some interesting social things happening there. It must have been quite awkward for all three men involved. But let's talk about turnpikes for a little bit, because turnpikes in Washington County were horse theft hotspots. So you can see turnpikes, they began as private company roads that businesses or wealthy individuals typically funded, and they were toll roads. So you had to pay at some point a toll to use them. They made travel quick and efficient, and they were a prime target for horse thieves, including all the inns and businesses located along the turnpikes. And then you also had county roads that were maintained by Washington County specifically. So if you were a horse thief, you might hit up and in on a turnpike. And because it was a straight shot somewhere else, it would really hopefully get you out of the county. You might have to deal with a situation around a toll house or the toll taker, but that would be, I have something on that later. But in 1817, we have a black mare being stolen from Aquilla Bennett stable on the turnpike to Boonesboro. So I have a picture here of that. You can see Boonesboro there on the right and the toll pike reaching down. So this is a picture from later about the 1870s, but the early form of that turnpike existed then. Bennett offered $40 for the mare and the capture of the thief, or $10 for the mare only. So people were really interested in capturing the horse thieves, even if they didn't get their horse back. There were a few more turnpikes. We had the classic US Route 40, right, from Baltimore to Cumberland, and other pikes that ran through Boonesboro, Clear Spring, Hancock, and Williamsport. And like I shared earlier, a horse thief could easily hop on and be gone. We have an interesting case of a horse theft from the poorhouse in 1819 in Hagerstown. If you are familiar with this structure, it's still standing in Hagerstown today at 239 North Locust Street. It was the poorhouse at this point. And in November 1819, Jonas Kramer had a dark brown horse stolen from the stable of the Hagerstown Almshouse, or poorhouse, it was also called. You also had what I'm calling horse borrowers. So in January of 1819, Washington County resident Benjamin Kurtz advertised in the Maryland Herald, "Some audacious and unknown person has got into the nefarious practice of stealing into my stable during the night and taking my horse, making use of and most shamefully abusing my saddle and bridle, and riding him very severely and returning him early in the morning, very much fatigued and worn down." So it's interesting. Kurtz offered a $5 reward for apprehending this thief and delivering him to the local magistrate. So this is essentially if you every evening decided to take a night job or something and you stole your neighbor's car and you drove it to your job and back in the morning, you ran down the gas, etc., etc. And your poor neighbor's waking up like, why don't I have gas in my car? Who is doing this? This is the 1819 version of that. So our association begins to develop and grow through the years. So in 1819, the association becomes a club. So the Club for the Apprehension of Horse Thieves will assemble at Macaulay's Tavern on Wednesday, the 29th, to form an official constitution. So this was located about where Cannon Coffee is located today. And the club met and they made their own rules and regulations to formalize their club and to become a little bit more official. So let's talk about a fun case, the fun case of John. Well, I say fun. It was at the expense of the people having their horses stolen from them. I understand that. But in 1830, we have John Farrow, who was a horse thief. So you can just imagine this man here. I have some depictions of what men who were fashionable in 1830 looked like. This middle picture here is called a fashion plate from a magazine. But we have on the right here, men's popular dress. This is a British version from 1833, but the same clothing was popular in America as well. Because we are going to talk about a man from this period. He would have dressed very much like this. So the Hagerstown Mail and Washington County Republican Advertiser for December 24th, 1830, warned readers, "Stop the horse thief, $30 reward." You can see this on the left here if you want to follow along. Made his escape on Sunday night, the 28th, from Sharpsburg, a man named John Farrow, about 6 feet high, slender made, light hair, fair complexion, and blue eyes, active upon his feet, which are small, a great braggadocio, and boasts of his activity and manhood. Had on a blue cloth frock coat of fine cloth, the skirts of which were nearly torn off in the scuffle. So the skirts and tails of his jacket were torn on when he got into a scuffle, when he escaped. Brown, and it goes on to describe more of what he's wearing. A black fur hat and scarf, buff Valencia waistcoat with gilt buttons, brown castanet pantaloons, a ruffles shirt and small breastpin, lace boots, mixed begonia socks. It's a very well-dressed man who is supposedly a horse thief. This fellow came to the neighborhood from Shenandoah Valley, or Shenandoah County, Virginia, with a threshing machine. He rode a small bay-blooded mare, which he had stolen from Thomas Newell of said county. The public are cautioned against said fellow, particularly the female sex, So he must have been handsome, well dressed. They thought the female sex would be drawn to him. And the above reward will be given for the apprehension and delivery of said fellow in the jail of Shenandoah County. So this article was published from Sharpsburg and also published in Pennsylvania as well, different cities there. So you can kind of see you might have your maybe a little bit more lower class, I want to say, horse thief operating, and then you might have a known horse thief who is supposedly appears as a gentleman, very well dressed. The ladies, he must have been a looker, etc. And someone is really intent on letting the public know there was a horse thief here. Somebody please get him. So just to kind of share with you as well, to balance this out, here's some women's fashion in the 19th century around the same time, particularly on the right there from the 1830s. So you can picture setting that stage in the 1830s, what people's clothing was looking like. All right. So I'm going to go through a few more stories here that are quite interesting in Washington County. So in 1838, we have a group of horse thieves escaping the Washington County jail, which I touched on a little earlier on the corner of Jonathan and Church Streets. One interesting incident occurred in February of 1838. A noted horse thief, he was a German man called Menken, Menkin. He escaped from the jail along with 4 other prisoners. The jailer, Mr. Catton, who was on duty, found that the 5 prisoners had escaped around 10 p.m. at night. The prisoners had concealed a chisel and saw, which they used to cut through the floor of their cell, drop into the room below, force the lock of the door open to access the jail yard, and then scale the walls by means of temporary ladders. So I don't know if these men were really working hard. If were they making their own temporary ladders? Did they have help on the inside, the outside? Who knows? But Mencken and another prisoner were pursued by the jailer and the others the whole way to Clear Spring. So from Hagerstown to Clear Spring, they made their escape, but they were then captured and returned to jail there. But 3 of the 5 men actually fully escaped. And I'm going to talk about something interesting now, which is horse thefts by enslaved persons. I have 2 cases here from 1815 and 1854. But you sometimes see in newspapers articles detailing when people who were enslaved would escape and they would steal horses to escape. They were their means of escape, and that would be noted in the paper. And we're getting, of course, closer to the Civil War here. So large monetary rewards were offered for both capturing the enslaved person and the stolen horses. As early as 1815, you find newspapers in Washington County sharing examples of runaway enslaved people stealing horses, such as in 1815. But one very interesting moment occurred in 1854 at Colonel Jacob Hollingsworth's townhome. Now, if you've been to the Miller House here at 135 West Washington Street. Beside us, at 127 West Washington Street, is also a historic home. It's not in good condition right now, but it has a very interesting history and past. It was owned by Colonel Jacob Hollingsworth of the Maryland Militia. He was a wealthy planter. He had moved to Hagerstown after living out towards Ringgold. And Hollingsworth had invested heavily in plantations in Mississippi and Louisiana that were being managed by his son. And in October of 1854, several of Hollingsworth's slaves or enslaved people escaped from his home, and they stole several of his horses and his buggy. These enslaved people included 2 women whose names I have shown here on the 1850 U.S. Census. So you can see if you go down to the bottom, Melinda, she's a 40-year-old Black woman, and Comfort, she's a 21-year-old mulatto woman listed there at the bottom. And 2 of these women would have been involved in this at the time. And Hollingsworth offered a $150 reward for their capture and return, which is the equivalent of about $5,600 today. And his entire estate at the time was worth about $2.4 million today. So according to a local historian of African American history, Dr. Emily Ampt, she found evidence that these 2 women, along with 2 others who escaped as well, they made it the entire way to New York New York City. And there is evidence then of them reaching there and living there as free persons following the Civil War. So they used horse thievery to get out, to escape slavery. So it is such an interesting moment in Washington County and Hagerstown's history. Maryland was a border state. Its residents' sympathies were very divided, north to south, north to south. You had plantations in Washington County, Maryland, such as Rockland, etc. And it's just interesting to note that horse theft also featured into enslaved persons using that as a method to escape slavery. All right, so let's talk about some horse theft during the Civil War. We've reached the 1860s, folks. So this has led us now to the Civil War. This is a depiction of, or a photograph that we have in the collection of Hagerstown in 1867. So this is pretty much what the public square looked like in during the Civil War period. But through Washington County, you had so much traffic during the Civil War, of course, Antietam, and horse theft. It was rampant during the Civil War for a variety of reasons. Both Federal Army and Confederate Army were taking horses from citizens for use in their armies. Soldiers were constantly taking horses from private individuals and families because horses were a necessity during wartime. I recently learned that during the Battle of Falling Waters, this was just after the Battle of Gettysburg, one single general went through 5 horses in 11 days of fighting. So you can only imagine if you're a general and you need 5 horses over the course of 11 days because they keep being killed and dying, how valuable horses truly were. Horses powered wars and they powered the machinery of war and all of that. So Washington County's residents were really suffering from their losses of horses and livestock during the Civil War. But what is interesting is you have newspaper articles at the time that are sharing that local horse thieves who were not soldiers, they were impersonating soldiers to take horses. And local people were having to figure out, is this actually a soldier who is legally taking my horse by order of the Union or Confederate general? Or is this someone impersonating a soldier? Do I listen to them or not? And what's going to happen in that situation? So ultimately, your local people were the ones who were suffering. So let's go to the next slide here. What were some headlines during the Civil War? Just going to read a few of these for you that you find. In 1862, local newspapers. Look out for them. Thieves impersonating soldiers steal horses. $210 reward for horses stolen by soldier impersonators. Horse thieves about, Washington County infested with thieves. A good association. Farmers unite to protect property from rebel army. So that is an association who's working to protect their property being taken by the Confederates. And rebels fired on in Shepherdstown for horse stealing. So of course, if you're Union supporting and you've got Confederates stealing your horses, you might fire on them, which is happening in 1865. So locations referenced where people were having their horses stolen from during the Civil War. William Beeler's Field near Funkstown, from the Hagerstown Post Office, so right downtown, someone's having their car taken, from Tilmonton, Sharpsburg, Williamsport, Leitersburg, Middletown, Dam Number 4 area. All of those places were being hit. Oh, here, I'll go back one more. So from the Herald Mail editor, on August 26, 1864, this is right after the ransom of Hagerstown, where Brigadier General McCausland, his Confederate soldiers hold the city of Hagerstown ransom. The editor of the Hagerstown Mail wrote to his readers about horse theft. He says, "Cannot something be done to rid the county of such thieving scoundrels? The affliction is becoming most grievous, and our suffering farmers ought to be protected. We hope the evil may soon be remedied." So citizens, even following the Civil War, even after 1865, citizens were still dealing with the same old horse thieves. And there's a lot of newspaper articles in the paper. I'll read just some lines here. George W. Porter, part of a horse theft ring, died in Hagerstown jail. So a known horse theft. John Hunstickle, caught for stealing horse and buggy. More horse stealing. J. Hildebrand's stolen horses, found in Chambersburg. Horses stolen near Hagerstown and taken to Mercersburg. Thieves jailed in Chambersburg. horse thieves are doing a driving business in Frederick County by driving off horses belonging to honest farmers. So this is still continuing. Here's an example of a horse thief sentenced in 1865. Some were tried and convicted, such as Robert Evans in December of 1865. He received 4 years and 5 months imprisonment in the Maryland Penitentiary in Baltimore, which is shown here, a depiction of it, and then the actual one in the right. And I believe this might have been torn down. I'd have to follow up on that, but I don't think the penitentiary is there anymore. But Evans was sentenced to time in Baltimore at the Maryland Penitentiary, which opened in 1911. So during this time, what was the club for the apprehension of horse thieves? What were they doing? So we have here a newspaper article. If you remember, they had formed their constitution in 1819. So they are developing and changing. We don't know if this is the same club from 1819 necessarily, but there is still some club that's remaining by 1867. So they have still been meeting. Apparently, their base of operations was at the Friendship Schoolhouse on the Williamsport Turnpike. This is along, Hagerstown to Williamsport along Route 11, around the halfway area. So just after the Civil War, this is a newspaper evidence that the Horse Thief Detection Association, it keeps changing its name. So it went from club, now it's back to the Horse Thief Detective Association. They are still meeting regularly. And their president is John Kendall. We have no official record books for this association. I wish we did. I think that would be very interesting, but they continue to meet into the 1870s. With Williamsport apparently as their base of operations. So we have this article from March 17th, 1869. It's an example of the association's activities. So once again, John Kendall is the president, John J. Hershey is the secretary. And to quote from the article, this association is composed of a number of our most active and influential farmers who are not only obligated to pay each other for the loss of a stolen horse, but bound to make every possible effort to arrest and punish the thief. The society has already sent some 3 or 4 horse thieves to the penitentiary and will leave no stone unturned to arrest and punish these rogues wherever they plunder any of its members. So once again, it's kind of that mutual assurance group that you're going to pay into it with the understanding that these local farmers who are part of this group are going to follow up, try to find the horse thieves, hand them hopefully over to the authorities, and then they will be sentenced and sent to the penitentiary. So this is kind of really showing you the nature of these anti-horse theft groups. They were very much grassroots, formed from the locals and farmers who faced this real problem and were organizing to support each other. So one of the places they met, here I'm going to take a quick drink. One of the places they met was the Friendship Schoolhouse, and it was described as being located 3 miles on the turnpike from Hagerstown to Williamsport, around the halfway area. And John J. Hershey, who was the secretary of the Horse Thief Detective Association, he had a farm along the turnpike from Hagerstown to Williamsport. So like I said, turnpikes were hot spots for horse theft. So he would have been very interested in keeping this group going. So in 1870, the Horse Thief Detective Association, they applied to be officially incorporated by the Washington County Legislature as a corporation. And this meant that this would allow them to own and protect their own assets, such as property, to potentially have decreased taxes, etc. This act to be incorporated was not passed. So it was not passed. They were not able to become an official corporation. But despite this, John Kendall, he continued as president up until 1878. And they continued to meet. I love these articles here, the little horses that are depicted in the newspapers from 1874 and 1878. You can see at the bottom there. And in a later article, the Horse Thief Detective Association, it's described by members as having existed for 16 years in this county, and by its energetic pursuit and prosecution of this class of thieves, protected the whole county during its existence. So this group in particular, they've only said they've been existing for 16 years. So that kind of shows that these different horse thief associations in the county, different clubs, have been existing for a long time. So who was John Kendall? There is a John Kendall buried in Riverview Cemetery in Williamsport. There were several John Kendalls at the time. This might have been who it was. Um, but John Kendall, he was their president of the Horse Thief Association up until 1878. Um, all right. You can see him there listed in the census. So yeah, like I shared, there were several John Kendalls in the Williamsport area. This might be one of those. All right. So the Horse Thief Detection Association continues into the 1880s. In 1884, 6 years after we last heard about the Horse Thief Detection Association, local farmers in the Hopewell neighborhood gathered together and organized yet another Horse Thief Detective Association. They're still dealing with the same problem. This is right above halfway area. They met at the Hopewell Schoolhouse. So schoolhouses were also almost like community centers in a way, places where these groups and clubs could meet. Um, and the newspaper also announced in their meeting notes that the new association is a revival of the old Friendship Association with John Kendall as president. The group is continuing on in various ways, and they are sharing that they're still focused on horse theft, but in general, they're also taking an interest in being sort of a neighborhood crime watch group. Um, and they form in 1885, they meet to discuss forming a vigilance committee, as they believe that the neighborhood has been thoroughly aroused by the frequent midnight depredations which have recently occurred, and it is the intention of the farmers to forcibly stop them. So farmers are largely making up these groups. Um, and yet, despite it all, you have in 1889, from the very meeting house where the Horse Thief Detection Agency is meeting, the Hopewell Schoolhouse, you have a horse and buggy are stolen from a teacher, Mrs. Clopper, during a children's entertainment night. So it's like the very meeting house the horse thieves are meeting, horses are being stolen from. They just can't get ahead of it. And then another interesting story, I'll go into this. This is a little bit of a longer story here as we head towards the end of the talk. But this is the horse thief George Merkel and horse thieving gangs in 1883. So we're getting closer to the end of the 19th century. And there's a very interesting story about George Merkel. He was born in 1817 in Bedford County, Pennsylvania. He was a farmer. He had a large family, a wife named Nancy. And in November of 1883, he was arrested and convicted for horse theft. He was captured near McConnellsburg, Pennsylvania, in possession of a horse that had been stolen from J.P. Carleton of Cumberland, Maryland, so Allegheny County. George Merkel was a horse thief. He was 66 years old at the time. He was convicted in Allegheny County Circuit Court for receiving a stolen horse. So he would have been part of this gang, this network of thieves, and one person had stolen it. He would have received it and transported it on. George Merkel ended up sharing his story as more of these articles about this crime are published in the newspaper. And it turns out that George Merkel had fallen in with a band of organized horse thieves led by a man named Robert Hutton. George Merkel had met Robert Hutton at the farm of J.P. Carleton in Cumberland, where Hutton himself had stolen a mare from Carleton's farm, and Hutton had ridden the mare out and passed it off to George Merkel. Merkel claimed he didn't know the horse was stolen. That's probably not true. And Merkel got on the mare and he rode off down the National Pike through Hancock, Maryland. I have an early 20th century photo of the Hancock mail wagon and toll gatherer at the Hancock Bridge. Merkel may have ridden along this route. And Merkel rode the stolen mare along the pike through Hancock towards McConnellsburg eventually into Pennsylvania, where he was then captured by a former clerk of the court, a man named Robert McDonald. And Robert McDonald took him back to Allegheny County, where he was tried and convicted. And while in prison, George Merkel, he confessed that he was part of an oath-bound gang of horse thieves operating in the area under ringleader Robert Bob Hutton. So you have this gang of horse thieves led by Robert Hutton, and they were essentially, they worked by, like I said, stealing the horse, and then different gang members would ride the horse to the next location, pass it off to the next person who transported it to the next location, on and on. And along this route, George Miracle described that the gang used certain signals used by the organization in transferring horses from one member of the gang to the other. And some of these signals, they would be riding around their routes and they would find in the road um, a shape of a horseshoe particularly placed, which would direct them to the next member. So, a very complex system they have going on here. George Miracle was sentenced to 10 years in the penitentiary for transferring the stolen horse. He broke down in prison and sobbed when the sentence was passed in court. He was taken back to jail, but that very same evening, just at dark, he escaped. So he escapes Allegheny County Jail again. And the Frostburg Mining Journal later reported that Miracle's escape was due to the use of a false key in uniform locks and recommended that the county commissioners change all the locks of the Allegheny County Jail because apparently someone knew which key to use and had used it to break out. So interesting here. Horse thieves, just for transferring a horse, not necessarily stealing it yourself. You were involved in stealing it. 10 years in the penitentiary. And then, of course, another story here, final particular story of a horse thief gang added again in 1884. So the same month of Miracle's arrest in November of 1883, another leader of a band of horse thieves, his name was Tobias C. Hudson, he was arrested and convicted in Washington County. Despite Hudson's arrest, his band of horse thieves had reformed by September of 1884, so the following year. And in one night, Hudson's gang hit up John J. Hershey's farm outside of Williamsport. Remember, he was the secretary of the Anti-Horse Theft Association. They stole a mare worth the equivalent of about $5,600 today and a set of harnesses. Then in the same night, they hit up Samuel Zeller's farm west of Hagerstown. They broke open a barn door and stole a black horse worth about $6,500 today. Neighbors heard the theft occurring at 2 o'clock a.m. And then the thieves targeted W.H.C. Kemp near Williamsport, stealing a buggy and a pair of horses with a total loss of $12,000. So those things altogether were worth $12,000. And the following day, the gatekeeper along the turnpike from Williamsport to Greencastle along Route 11 confirmed the story, sharing that a group of riders had driven rapidly through the gate towards Williamsport. About an hour after, returned and went in the direction of Pennsylvania, with a buggy and horses matching the description of the one stolen from Kemp. So the state's attorney the following day posted of the triple threat, all three locations they had hit, and offered a reward of $200 for the arrest and conviction of the thieves, which is about $6,500 today. So it sounds like something right out of the Wild West, right here in Western Maryland. So as we wrap up our talk here, we're heading into the 20th century. I've not found any information on the anti-horse thief associations after the 1880s. If you do have any information on this, please let me know. But horse theft continued, of course, still frustrating locals who still depended on horses for farming and businesses in the 20th century. I love this photo from our collection. It's taken in 1917, and it shows a man with his horses and family members or people on the farm in the background. But I do want to share another aspect of anti-horse theft associations that I haven't talked on very much. And that is that anti-horse theft associations were prominent in many other states, especially in the West. One large group was the AHTA, the Anti-Horse Theft Association, founded in 1854 in Clark County, Missouri. This group grew to 40,000 members by 1916. And they actually became almost type of a policing force across that large territory. But one aspect of anti-horse theft associations is that, like any other type of policing force or vigilance organization, that leaves room for corruption. And in the course of researching this topic, I came across articles that shared about how these local horse theft groups, especially in the South during the 1920s and 1930s, they would morph into a form of antagonistic group that would oppress African Americans. And they would almost use their power as these gangs themselves to oppress local African Americans. So you can easily imagine if you think of a group of men on horses, very physical presence, and you're already in an African American struggling during the era of Jim Crow, how terrifying that would be to have this group coming at you. Um, I didn't come across a reports of that in our local newspapers. Um, but like I already shared, the history that we do have about these groups locally is very slim, only several of those articles I shared. But it does seem that the groups of what I could find in the papers, that they were very frustrated with the problem of horse theft, and they took protective matters into their own hands to protect themselves and their property. I'm not sure particularly of any type of corruption that would have happened locally. But I did just want to share about that because you will find that coming up with these groups. So finally, we arrive at the end of the Anti-Horse Theft Association era. So this photo of Hagerstown was taken in 1936. In 1930s, horse theft convictions continue to pop up in newspapers here and there. Hold on one second. I'm gonna have to pause real quick. It looks like we have someone at the door. All right, everyone. So we're back here. We did have someone stop in and visit the Miller house. On our last slide, so I just wanted to share then about the end of the anti-horse theft associations. Like I shared, you still had some thievery occurring in the 1930s. The average horse thief conviction in Maryland during the 1930s was 4 years in the Maryland Penitentiary in Baltimore. The Maryland Correctional Institution in Hagerstown was authorized in 1931 as the Maryland State Penal Farm. So prisoners were working, doing hard labor, and then that opened in 1942. But the advent of automobiles really coincided, of course, with the decline in active horse thefts and anti-horse theft societies. Consider being a horse thief. You're riding away on a horse, being chased by a policeman in an automobile. Back roads might have had their charms for the average horse thief, but at a certain point, automobiles were just eclipsing this. Of course, through the 1920s and 30s, anti-horse theft associations were kind of grinding to a halt as roads were improving, police departments were improving, and the automobile industry was flourishing. So you kind of have police taking over a lot more of this policing of theft and things like that. And I have a quote that I will share with you tonight to finish the talk. It's a quote from the West Liberty Horse Thief Detecting Association of Muscatine, Iowa, who in 1938 announced to the public the following: members say 25 years without a single horse thief to chase is too long. So they were closing their horse thief association after that. So that is the end of the presentation. So I hope you enjoyed hearing about horse thieves, horse theft, and anti-horse theft associations in Washington County. And this is only one of several true crime talks that we have here at the Washington County Historical Society. So in the future, I will try to share a few more of those with you. All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing here, and thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.